Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another session of the Virtual Training Institute. I know you guys are now coming in, so welcome. And while we wait for the top of the hour to arrive, in the chat box, if you could introduce yourself, that would be wonderful. We'll get started in a minute or so. Make sure when you are typing in the chat box that you're addressing it to panelists and attendees. Hi, Jennifer. Hi, Amy, Pamela from West Virginia, Natalie, good morning. Deborah, hi, nice to see you. Linda, oh, hi, it's nice to see you guys. I see some familiar names. We've got different states, different parts of Maryland represented. Hi, Kelly. Hi, Amelia, or Mike, excuse me. Suzanne. So for those of you who just got into the room, the Zoom room, welcome to another session of the Virtual Training Institute. We're introducing ourselves in the chat box. We'd love to just see you here in the chat box. So go ahead and put your name and where you teach or where you serve adult learners. My name is Jamie Harris. I'm an adult education program specialist, and I'm the facilitator for today's session, Strategies to Support Learners with Learning Differences. Ramona, the wise and highly knowledgeable Ramona, will be doing today's session. But before we jump into the session, I'd like to do a poll. We'd like to know who's in the room. So I'll give a few seconds for you all to respond. Can you please tell us your role within your program? Oh, it's nice to see some individuals from the correctional institutions here. Hi, Sarah from PA. All right, give a few more seconds. All right, so as you can see here, we have a lot of ABE instructors represented. We have ESL instructors, other adult ed stakeholders, program administrators, and instructional specialists. So thank you so much for being here. Ramona Kunkel is at the Maryland Department of Labor. She's also an adult education program specialist. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what she has to say because she has a lot of experience with a population of individuals with learning differences. While the session's going on today, the chat box and the Q&A box will be open. So please feel free to put questions in either box and we'll respond to it as we go. So I'm going to turn off my mic and camera, and Ramona, it's all yours.
Thank you, Jamie. I appreciate that. So yes, as Jamie mentioned, I work for the Maryland Department of Labor. I have been teaching in the field since the late 1980s. So my passion is working with learners with special needs, with learning differences, special populations. So this really is my passion. So let me tell you where I'm going with this presentation. So I'm going to do an overview. We're going to talk a little bit about executive function, talk about relationships, talk a little bit about mindset, teaching approach, and classroom management, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time left over at the end for questions and answers and possibly some sharing. So I attended the 35th Annual Learning Differences Conference, and this was originally, as many conferences, supposed to be in person in March, and then, well, COVID hit. So it went virtual. So this took place virtually in October of 2020, just a couple months ago. And the purpose of it was really built around executive function. So what I'm doing here is I've taken all of the pertinent information that applies to adult education and put it together into one presentation pretty much just sharing and passing on what I learned from this conference to you. I will state that although this conference was a little bit more heavy geared towards K through 12, as many conferences are, there was still a lot of good information that definitely applies to adult education. So again, I took that information and just picked out what I thought was appropriate for our population, and I'm presenting it here. So I'm going to start off with executive function because that really was the broad topic of this. So this comes from slides from the conference itself. So I noted who that author is, and just a real basic background is that executive function is the cognitive command and control system of the brain. So basically you could say it's kind of like the CEO of the brain. So it's the manager, it's the organizer, it's the coordinator of all our internal and external function. It's really how the brain processes information and helps us guide through thought and behavior. So when we talk about executive function, it's the ability to think critically and the ability to self-regulate. It's also the capacities that allow us to, that enable independent, purposeful, and self-directed behavior. So when a student doesn't have the proper executive function skills, they're not able to perhaps manage their time appropriately, or maybe they might have some impulse control. So let's go to the next one. So I like this slide because it just kind of really puts all those skills into one nice, neat little list. And this certainly isn't, all inclusive, but I think this really takes care of, what we need to know. So task initiation. I know that when I taught, a lot of my students would just come in, even though they knew every single class we started with math, they would just sit there and wait for class to start. But there were those students that would just take out their book and start working in their math book. Because in my class, math was all individualized. They were all doing their own thing based on where they needed to be. Sustained attention. We know that especially now, that's a little bit more challenging in an online environment. Task persistence, just sticking with a task. Response inhibition. I know that when I taught students with special needs, there were students that would just immediately react. It's like they went from 0 to 60 in nothing. So just being able to sort of step back and respond instead of just react. Effective regulation, just regulating their emotions, their behavior. Time management. This can be a tough one. Keeping track of, where you are and how long, you've spent on a task, and allowing the appropriate amount of time for that task. Working memory, just being able to, hold into your thoughts, certain things that you've learned, and, skills and tasks that you've learned, so that you can then carry them through. Organization, just being organized. Sometimes, we have students that come in, they just have papers flying all over the place. So I know that we used to try and get them notebooks so that they could organize their papers a little bit better. Planning, flexibility. Some students are very flexible and can kind of go with the flow. Other students, they have a difficult time with making adjustments. And again, especially now where everything is flexible, you're constantly having to change. We're constantly being updated on the news, on the latest of what's going on, what's the latest restrictions. So, flexibility can be a challenge for some of our students. social thinking, and then metacognition, which is just being aware of how you think and how you process information. So I put this on here. I don't even remember if they mentioned this or not, but I have done some research about executive function, and I found this website absolutely invaluable. Center on the Developing Child Resources. This is put out through Harvard University, and they have some really great information. In fact, I did a presentation a while ago on toxic stress, and I got my information from this website. So I have just the generic website on there, but then also specific to executive function. Although it's primarily geared towards children, there's a lot on there that also applies to adults. So I included the building skills adults need for life, and how children and adults can build core capabilities for life. And the other thing I want to mention about this website, why I like it so much, is that, it might help us to remember that these children that are referred to on this website, especially when they talk about building executive function and self-regulation and toxic stress, that those children are now adults that are sitting in our classrooms. So that's what they experience as children, and that is now carried over to their adulthood. So if they didn't learn those self-regulation and those executive function skills as they grow up, they now become our adults that still have difficulty in those areas. So I just want to do a real brief overview about executive function. Okay. Another, probably one of the points that they hammered home more than anything was the importance of relationships. I can't tell you how many webinars and conferences I have attended since the pandemic hit that talks about the importance of relationships. So they presented this information, that it can be more challenging in a virtual environment. So we kind of miss that almost organic or natural relationships that build when we're face to face. I know many instructors, they get to their classroom anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes before the class even starts. I know when I taught, I would let my students know that I was usually there about half an hour ahead of class, and that if they needed to talk to me or they want to go over anything, I was more than happy to. I would even stay after class. So that's how we just sort of naturally built those relationships. But now that we're in a virtual environment, it can be a little bit more challenging. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. So I put on here charismatic adult. So one of the keynote speakers, he did a great job of this, and he talked about the charismatic adult. And he referred to Dr. Siegel's definition, which is a person with whom children, but it can also be an adult, identify and from whom they gather strength. So this can be anybody. So for us, there are times when the adult education instructor is that learner's only appropriate role model. They may have no support system. Their family may not be supportive. Their friends may not be necessarily supportive. So you as the adult educator may be their sole support system. I put this on here, a bus driver can be a charismatic adult, because the keynote speaker shared this story that was really interesting. So now this happened in the K through 12 system, but it's just to kind of bring home the point. So he talked about how there was a class, and the teacher wanted the students to bring into the class, I can't remember if it was a presentation or what it was, of the person that was what we would call the charismatic adult. And so this little boy said, well, can I have, and I'll just call him Peter. He says, can I have Peter come? And the teacher said, well, sure. He says, you sure that's okay? Peter can come. He said, well, yeah. He said, but who's Peter? And he said, Peter is my bus driver. So for him, his bus driver was his charismatic adult. That was the person that he gathered strength from. It was the person that was, in some respects, his support system that he felt safe with. So I just mentioned that because, you know, as we know, we always want to have, you know, nurturing and you know, safe environments, but we sometimes forget that we might be the person for that student that makes that student feel safe. Okay, so another point that they made was that learning happens when we pay attention to the whole person. So I know it sounds funny, but you know, each person is a composite of many roles. So they're not just your student. They're also, you know, a father or a daughter or a mother or, you know, a friend, a church goer. They're just made up of a whole bunch of, I guess you could say, almost people into one person. They also talked about having compassion for our students and ourselves. And I think sometimes it's hard for us to have compassion for ourselves. We get very hard on ourselves and we want to have great lessons, but just give everybody some slack, have some forgiveness, you know, just be flexible and just say to yourself, yeah, you know what, that lesson didn't go well. Or, yeah, my technology really didn't work so well today. You know, I was using something new and it just messed up. It's okay. You know, we're all learning. We're still figuring this out. You know, we don't have it all down yet. Also have empathy. And so I put this on here. This is this quote, and I'm not sure where I got it from, but true empathy requires that you step outside your own emotions to view things entirely from the perspective of the other person. And that can be challenging to do. But their whole point was that, you know, if you have a student that's getting upset, you know, we used to say something to the effect of, you never know what happened to your student before they just walked into your classroom. In this case, you never know what may have just happened to your student before they turned on their camera or they logged in. You know, maybe they found out that somebody in their family has COVID. Maybe they found out that their son isn't doing their schoolwork. You know, there's so many things that student could be going through that could be creating a situation in which, no, they may not be paying attention to what's going on because they're so distracted with so many other things. And then, like I talked about before, that, you know, the organic relationships that used to happen just face to face in the classroom, you know, it's a little bit more difficult. So there are some programs that are actually creating office hours. So I know there's one program where they have classes Monday and Tuesday, Thursday and Friday, and then Wednesday, they schedule office hours with their students. So that's a time for students who need help, who need some work, who maybe just want to talk, that they can then develop those relationships with their students. My program has to do office hours 30 minutes before our classes. Okay, well, that's interesting. That's good. Yeah, I think that's a great way just to develop those relationships and, you know, just so that students can really get the sense that you're invested in them. Yeah, that's great that the students, you know, think that's one of the favorite things. That's wonderful. Yeah, it's wonderful that students are taking advantage of that opportunity. Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about mindset because this is another presentation that was given. And I got to tell you, it's Eduardo Becerro. I don't know if I'm saying his name correctly, but he did an awesome job. He was fantastic. So we're going to talk a little bit about him. So many of you may have heard of Carol Dweck and her growth mindset versus fixed mindset. So I messed this up a little bit. I actually meant to ask you what growth mindset and fixed mindset was, but whoops. So growth mindset is understanding that abilities and intelligence can be developed. So it's saying, okay, well, you know, I don't have this, but I can learn it. I can develop it. A fixed mindset is when people just believe that it can't be developed. You know, I'm bad at math. I'll never be good at math. You know, I'll never learn this. You know, I'll never be able to do it. It's having convinced yourself that that you're never going to be good at something. So I included this little chart here because I think it does a really good job of just kind of putting it all together so that you can see how this all works out. So you have skills and intelligence. If you have a fixed mindset, it's just static. You know, static, what you have is what you have. Versus growth, where it's fluid. You can grow, you can develop. Going down to effort, you know, it's something you do when you're not good. Versus it's an important part of learning. So, you know, if they put a lot of work, they're like, oh yeah, I just had to put a lot of work into that, a lot of effort because I'm just not good at it. Where somebody with a growth mindset said, no, this is just part of the learning process. I have to put in work. I have to put in effort because that's the only way I'm going to learn. Challenges, you know, fixed, you're afraid of failure, just give up. Growth mindset says, no, I'm going to persevere. I'm going to work through it. You know, I'm just going to sort of hunker down and just keep plowing through. Feedback and criticism, fixed says, oh, they take it personally. They get very defensive. But the growth mindset, they may like it. Maybe they don't necessarily like it, but they at least use it to learn. They say, okay, this is part, again, of the learning process. And they really talked about mistakes. And that the fixed mindset, they hate them, they absolutely avoid them, making them, and then the growth mindset, they value them and they realize that, again, it's part of the learning process and it's an opportunity to grow and to learn. Okay, so I just included this because, again, I thought this was, you know, just a nice little visual. You know, the growth mindset says, I can get smarter, learning is my goal, effort makes me stronger, I spend more time and work harder, and therefore I'm going to get higher achievement. Okay, so they also talked about promoting a growth mindset. And I have to tell you, I found this really interesting. I'm going to talk about a study that they did in just a minute. So when you praise for intelligence, such as you're so smart, it can actually have a negative impact. And I'm going to talk about what this continued with easier task in a minute. If you praise for effective effort, such as you did a great job, or you really worked hard on this assignment, it actually can have a positive effect and they can progress to more challenging tasks. However, you want to avoid empty praise like, well, you did your best, or oh, at least you tried, or oh, great effort. You know, they have to really believe that you believe it. So if it's too empty, yeah, it's not going to really have the effect that you hope that it does. And yes, you know, praising even small improvements, progress is progress. You know, I think we get so caught up in, oh my gosh, but I'm not here yet. That's okay. That's all right. You know, it's baby steps. We didn't get there overnight. Nobody did. You had to do those small little pieces along the way to get to your end goal. So absolutely, praise small successes. So a growth mindset. So if you want learners to have a growth mindset, I thought this was really interesting. They said you have to model a growth mindset. So they've actually done studies, and they've shown that when an instructor has a fixed mindset, it can have a very negative impact on their learners. So for example, if the instructor says, yeah, I understand, you're not good at math. I've never been good at math either. I don't think I'm ever going to be good. Well, you're setting that up for the student to believe that there's no hope for them to improve too, because you've convinced yourself that this is the way you are. It's never going to change. So again, going back to that, being a role model, you want to model what what you want, what you hope to get from your students. So I see we have a question. So the most impressive students are low learners, often exhibit growth mindset and an abundance of confidence. Yeah, isn't that interesting? So you want to start with yourself on a growth mindset before working on others. So again, teachers who felt that they were bad, they sort of carried those feelings onto their students. So people in a fixed mindset, they don't pay attention to their mistakes because it makes them feel badly about themselves. So in a growth mindset, we want to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. Again, I taught primarily in a program that worked with learners with special needs, and they did not like making mistakes. And some would get very, very upset. And I would tell them, I'd say, well, no, mistakes are good because that means that you're learning. I said, if you knew everything, then I wouldn't have anything to teach you. Said, but no, my job is to give you things that you need to work on. And as you're working on it, of course, you're going to make mistakes at the beginning. That's okay. But we're going to get better. We're going to work on this together, and you're going to improve and you're going to learn it. And then we're going to go on to the next thing. But that still was very, very hard for them to kind of stomach sometimes. Okay, so I want to talk about this. So this is a study that was done by Carol Dweck. And so this was based on 400 fifth graders. They were given a really easy nonverbal IQ test. It had 10 questions. So some were praised for effort and some were praised for their intelligence. So they were then given a choice of 2 tests. The next test would be harder, but would be an opportunity to learn and to grow. I have notes here, and so another test was an easier one, similar to the first one, that they would probably do well. So those who were praised for intelligence, 67% chose the easier option. Those who were praised for their effort, 92% chose the harder test. Now that sounds like that would be backwards, but actually the rationale for that is because those who were praised for their intelligence, they didn't want to disprove the instructor that they weren't smart. So the instructor is saying, oh, you're so smart, you're so intelligent. So they picked the easier option so that they could stay in that teacher's eyes as being smart. The other group, and so they kind of wanted to play it safe, the growth mindset, or the ones who were praised for their effort, they actually looked forward to a more challenging task because it was an opportunity to grow. Then they gave the students an impossible task. The effort group worked harder and longer and enjoyed the task more than those that were praised for their intelligence. And they just got frustrated and they just gave up. So then they were given a final test with the same difficult level as the first one. The group that was praised for their intelligence did worse than on the first test. They actually went down negative 20%, and the group that was praised for their effort increased their score by 30%. So the bottom line is that praise for effort, praising for intelligence can actually have a very negative effect. And that students who are praised for effort will actually want to do more challenging tasks because they want to improve and they want to learn. Where the ones praised for intelligence, they want to sort of keep their intelligent label. Whoops. So they also made the fact that having a growth mindset isn't enough, that we also need to make sure that their basic needs are met, which of course is based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So of course we have down here, the food, water, need to have my glasses, warmth and rest, and of course it keeps going up. So they still need to have their basic needs met. So it's not just about growth mindset. There are other things that play into this. They also talked about perfectionism, and Carol Dweck has a great YouTube video about perfectionism. I would really encourage you to watch it. It is definitely worth your time, in my opinion. So here's Eduardo Bisanero. I might be pronouncing his name incorrectly, but these are one of the points that I got from his presentation, that in a growth mindset, perfection doesn't exist. And I think that was probably the most important point that he made. We can always improve. We can always make progress, even though we will never reach perfection. We can be compassionate to ourselves and don't compare ourselves to others. And that compassion is the thief of, and then some people say, joy, contentment, and happiness. The direct link, do you mean for the perfection? There is no direct link to the conference, if that's what you mean. But
so,
I do the direct
for those
link.
who are attending, all of this will be available on the website where you registered. And so you'll be able to click the link that's in Ramona's slide deck when the slide deck becomes available.
Thank you, Jamie. So here are some Mindset Works resources, and this is the organization that Carol Dweck and Eduardo put together, and this is where they work out of. So here are just some videos that I thought might be helpful for you. There's the main page to all of the videos, and then there's one specifically about growth mindset, and then the one that I just referenced about the study on praise and mindset. So, she talks about that whole study that I referred to, and then the power of belief. So again, those are just some of the videos that I picked out that I thought might be useful to you and might be interesting. So the other thing that they talked about was teaching approach. So it's called Learning Differences Conference. And we had an earlier presenter talk about briefly the difference between learning disabilities and learning differences. So there's a shift. So moving from learning disabilities to learning differences. So it's going from a deficit-oriented model to a strength-based model. So they talked about the importance of not labeling. I think sometimes a student might get a label as they are, they have ADHD. So now everything that they do becomes about, ADHD, when really that what is going on in that moment may have nothing to do with them having ADHD. Or I've had students that say, well, I was diagnosed with dyslexia and I did some reading about it. So I know that that's why I do blah, blah, blah. So, labeling can be good. Diagnosis can be good for getting the proper treatment and getting the proper accommodations. But sometimes it can also have a negative effect. So alliance is insufficient, need relationships, the belief that they can do it. So it's not just enough to say, okay, we're all in this together. You also, again, going back to relationships, need to build relationships. You want to try and convey the belief that they can do it, that you believe in them, you have faith in them. So one of the things they said was that what they heard over and over again with students that had a positive feeling about learning was that, fill in the person's name, never gave up on me. And that's what you hope your students feel, is that you're not going to give up on them, that you're going to keep pulling for them. You're going to constantly be in their corner, cheering them on, helping them out, guiding them through the process. They also interestingly talked about learning difference advantage, and that in many times they have to work harder than so many other students. They have to put in more effort. They have to find ways to accommodate and other ways of learning. So in many ways that can be an advantage because they know how to work hard. They know what hard work is. They know what it's like to put in effort. And so they are actually better poised for success later on in their life. They also talked about we can change the narrative. And that's one of the things that I've been hearing just in my own personal, self-educating, is that even though they might have a certain script in their head, you can change that narrative. And you can change that narrative by students surrounding themselves with supportive people, you as an instructor, supportive classmates, so that you change the way that you think about yourself. Also, just self-awareness, being aware of, what your struggles are, and that efforts need to be strategic. So, you just can't put your effort into everything. You have to be very mindful about where you put your effort. And again, just a strength-based teaching versus a disabilities-based approach. So going into it saying that, okay, they have strengths. We're going to focus on that. So focus on what the learner is able to do rather than what is a challenge. Of course, they're always going to have challenges, but we also want to point out what they can do well. Now, they didn't talk about the dreaded red pen, but this is my own, this is Ramona talking. So when I taught, and I know there are others who share my philosophy, that I never used a red pen when I corrected papers, because we know what that's like in our K through 12 years. When we saw a red pen, that usually didn't mean something positive. It usually meant that was what was wrong. So it draws attention to what, so we want to draw the attention to what they got right more than what was not correct. Now, this is just what I did, and I'm sure there are many that may disagree, but when I corrected math papers, I never marked a problem wrong. What I did is I put C's next to what they got right. And then I would say, look at all the problems that you got right. So I can see that you know how to do this. So what I'm going to do is, if it doesn't have a C next to it, go back and look at that problem and see if you can figure out for yourself where you might have made your mistake. If you can't figure it out, that's okay. We'll work through it together. But again, I wanted them to focus on what they got right instead of focusing on what they got wrong. They also talked about the power of the word yet. And that is a growth mindset. When you use the word yet, what you're saying is, okay, I don't have this down right now. I don't have it down yet, but I can work through that and I can improve my skills so that I can get there. When you just say, well, I don't know how to do long division, it kind of makes it sound pretty final. But if you say, I don't know how to do long division yet, it puts yourself in a mindset that, okay, not there now, but I'm going to get there. Okay. They also talked a little bit about classroom management. So they talked about, think to yourself, how do I make every student feel like they belong and they're welcome? So they even talked about just starting with a 10-minute homeroom, like asking your students, how are you doing? Even sharing possibly about how you're coping with COVID. If you feel comfortable with that. It depends upon your students, got to feel them out as to whether you feel like that's going to be appropriate. But, even just doing a simple check, how are y'all doing today? Anybody want to share what they, something interesting that they did today? Anything. Also talked about giving students a choice and some say about their education. So asking for feedback, it makes them feel more motivated and giving them a sense of personal control. And then they also talked about something called islands of competencies. So it's seeing their strength and you want to lessen the fear of mistakes. So again, just impressing upon them that when they're making mistakes, they're learning, they're growing, and that's a growth mindset. Classroom management can be a little bit more challenging in a virtual environment. You want to set your expectations early. Just put it out there what your expectations are so that you're not sort of almost having to try and backpedal. Also, help learners set goal and determine their why. I think it's great to help students learn, set up goals, but I think it's equally as important that they know why. Why do they want to be able to do this? What's going to be their personal attachment to this instead of just this nebulous, well, I want to get my GED. Well, why do you want to get your GED? Well, I don't know. I just, maybe, trying to draw it out a little bit more, well, why? What is that going to do for you? What's that going to feel like? What's that going to do for your life, for the life of your children eventually? Provide clear transitions from activity to the next. So, making it very clear, okay, we are now done with this activity. We're done with reading. We are now going to move on to math. Just very, very clear so that students aren't having to guess. Okay, so cameras on or off. This actually got brought up in one of the sessions that I attended in the Maryland TESOL conference. And there was a little bit of discussion. So what came out of it was encouraged but not required. And one of the presenters brought up that you're in their personal space and that for some of our learners, their culture may be that they don't want anybody to see their home. They don't want anybody to see their environment. So some of our learners, they live in slightly more chaotic environments where there's a lot going on, and they may not want you to be invited into their home, shall we say. So I think this is where building relationships comes in. If you've built a relationship and you know about that student and you know why they may not want their camera on, that may be helpful. First, I understand that, you know, when students have their camera on, it's much more likely that they'll be more engaged. But the flip can also be where a camera off, the student may actually be more engaged because they're not worried about what you can see in their home. They're not worried about, you know, their child or somebody else walking in the background. Now they can focus just on what you're saying because they don't have that distraction. So it's just, yes, privacy. It all comes down to privacy. You know, the reality of it is that you are now in my home. And so, you know, we just want to be mindful of that. And again, comes back to relationships. Okay, they also talked about rethinking positive thinking. So for the purpose of this presentation, I read this book. And here's, because the title intrigued me so much. So this is what it's about. So hang in there with me for just a second, and I'll tell you what this is about. So I noted the book down at the bottom, so that if you're interested, I actually got it out of the Baltimore County Public Library. So what they found is that positive thinking may not energize us into action. Positive thinking may also not be realistic. It may relax us and make it harder to take action. It may also lead one to think that they've already accomplished the goal. Just by positively thinking, it's almost like in their mind, they've already done it. That it doesn't help us complete tasks that require a substantial amount of energy, effort, or commitment, and it may leave out accounting for obstacles. So I want to tell you about a study that the author did. She did many studies, and she writes about them in her book. So in her book, she asked a group of women in a weight loss program what they would do if they were tempted by a plate of donuts. So some were optimistic about their ability to resist the donuts. Others recognized that they would be tempted, and it would be a challenge for them, and it would give them cravings. After a year, the women who had negative images of them not resisting the donuts, meaning giving in, they actually lost 24 pounds more than those who were optimistic about their ability to lose weight. And here's the reason why. The reason is that they didn't account for obstacles. So she came up with something called mental contrasting, which you have 2 positive future words and 2 reality keywords. And this can be tied to as a self-regulation tool. They made this the point in this conference. So the idea is that you want to have 2 positive things that you think about, but then you also have to have those 2 words that kind of ground you and make it realistic. Her husband was also doing his own research, and he came up with something called implementation intentions, which is where you think about where, when, and how you're going to reach your goal. So initially they came up with MCII, but they didn't like that. And they thought, well, how can we put this all together? So they came up with WHOOP. So first you think of your wish. What do I wish for? What do I want to be my outcome? But then you think of your obstacles. What obstacles could I possibly have? And then you come up with a plan. And I say this because I know that, you know, there are programs that do goal setting, and that's great, but there's a missing piece to that. The missing piece, and there are studies that have been done to support this, the missing piece is accounting for possible obstacles. Okay, my goal is to get to every class on time. Let's pretend we're not in COVID and it's in person. well, what are you going to do if your car breaks down? Okay, well, now I have to think of a plan. Okay, well, maybe I can ask my next door neighbor for a ride. Or, maybe I can exchange numbers with somebody in my class so that I can get the homework that I missed. That's going to prime you for a greater chance of success when you think of possible hiccups that could happen along the way, and then you plan for those. You strategize, you figure out, what am I going to do so that I can move past this and it doesn't prevent me from moving forward in reaching my goal. So I want to open this up for any questions, or if anybody has any suggestions or other strategies that they might want to share. I'm sorry, I only have about 10 more minutes, but just anything that anybody want to share. But again, my point was just to take the information from this conference and just to send it out to all of you, and to kind of pass on their pearls of wisdom. So in the meantime, I will put up, here is my information. So if you ever want to reach out to me, I am always available, happy to talk about especially any strategies or any curriculum that has to do with especially special populations, learning differences, special needs, whatever you want to call it. It's really my passion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ramona, for what you've shared. A lot of things to really think about, especially the WHOOP research, because I really love positive thinking, but thinking about obstacles and planning for it is equally important. So just a lot to consider. For the participants here, we do have a few moments for questions, but while we wait for your questions, the feedback survey link has been placed in the chat box. Please provide your feedback. Ramona, I'm sure, would value hearing what feedback you have for her. Also, I'm going to put in here in the chat box the proof of participation link. Please complete this after you viewed all the sessions that you plan to attend for the Virtual Training Institute this week, and fill out one form for your request for proof of participation. This session has been recorded and will be available in January of 2021. So if you want to look at it and check out the links, as I believe MJ was asking for, all of that should be available on the same website where you registered in January of 2021. Did you want to add anything else, Ramona, before we close out today's session?
I just want to thank you all for attending. I love to share information, and thank you, Jamie, for helping me through this and being the host. And just thank you all for your participation, and hope you all have a good rest of your day.
Have a great Thursday, everyone. Goodbye.